Hello and welcome to Meet the Patient, brought to you by A Life in a Day. As part of our ongoing commitment to enable people working in the healthcare sector to increase their understanding, empathy and patient focus, in our series of interviews, we're asking people living with a condition or a disease to go beyond the clinical and share their personal stories to really demonstrate the impact that it has on relationships, family, friendships, work and their emotional well-being. And today our focus is on type 1 diabetes, and I'm really delighted to be speaking today to Dan Newman. Hi Dan.
Hi Bev.
Now I would like to begin by asking you, what do you think is the one thing that people need to be most aware of when they think about living with type 1 diabetes?
So for me, I think the one thing that people need to be most aware of for people living with type 1 diabetes is that it's not just a physical condition, it's mental and emotional as well. And for me, I would say the mental and emotional side are probably they're more challenging than the physical side. And that's the side of the condition that takes the most work for an individual or for family or friends or that support network to really adjust to. But I think as an individual, that mental and emotional side, and within that, it's getting to that point of acceptance that you have type 1 diabetes. And that's much easier said than done, accepting that you have the condition. But when you do, there's a sense of relief. There's almost this sense of freedom that you accept that the situation you're in, you accept that for now it's a chronic condition that doesn't have a cure and it won't change, but also that you can live your life as well, but with adjustments, and maybe it's different to what your friends or family or people around you have to do, but you can live life. And so for me, I'm going to make you try, but injecting yourself or changing your sensor or changing your pump can be very straightforward. It takes it depends what it is, maybe a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. But that constant thinking and managing of the condition, that's the hard part. And that's where once you overcome that and you really accept that, and it doesn't mean that you won't have bad days, you'll have good and bad days, but there's that level of acceptance and things change. And that for me is the one thing that I would want people to know. Don't just view the physical, think of the mental and emotional side as well.
I just wondered, what's your experience been like in terms of support for your emotional well-being with your condition?
So particularly with the type 1 diabetes, when it comes to the mental or emotional support, when I look at the support from the health service or the diabetes service, it hasn't really been there. So I was diagnosed in 1996, and back then how we spoke about health or mental health, mental well-being is very, very different to how we speak about it or view it today. And so going through my kind of early teens, teenage years, early 20s was probably when I needed the most mental and emotional support, but it wasn't there. Thankfully, I'm now in a different position, and I found that support in different places, in peer support. So from other people living with type 1 diabetes. I used to work at a diabetes charity, so even working there was a safe space for me, even though it was my place of employment. It was also a safe environment. And so I've found support in lots of different places, but not directly through my diabetes team or my diabetes service. However, that's my experience, but I know for other people, and I know it's changed in recent years, that service and support is available. And I think that's vital for anyone living with type 1 diabetes to have access to that support.
Could you share a story with us about how you being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes impacted your family, and maybe how it continues to impact your family if it does?
Yeah, so I think the way that it impacted my family, particularly back then, as I mentioned already, how we would speak about health or view health is very different now. And I perhaps can't speak for all of it, but I don't think that they really understood the magnitude of the condition and what it was and what it entailed. And also, I'm from a Caribbean background, and so within our culture, we don't really talk about health that much. And so I think that has had an impact for my family, that had an impact for me growing up in terms of just having that space to talk about health or understanding the nature of type 1 diabetes, what it is, what all of it entails. And so that all has kind of come together. And I think for a long period of time, yeah, we didn't talk about it. However, me now doing a lot of my advocacy work, I bring that experience of not talking about it to the wider domain of talking about it. And also people, as I mentioned, from a Caribbean background or even within the Black community, we don't always talk about health, but now me doing it on a public platform is almost breaking that barrier down and wanting to do that. And then my family is seeing what I'm doing as well. So in a way, I would like to think that they're learning. I've taken my cousin to some events that I've been involved in, so he can see kind of what I do in the advocacy space and get a better idea of what it's like for me living with type 1 diabetes and also others living with the condition as well. So for me, it's very much that, okay, that was the experience as the family, but now that I'm an adult and I'm older, how can I use that experience to change it, hopefully for others, but also change my family's understanding as well. And I think it's working from what I hear.
And can we talk about friendships as well?
Yeah.
Do you have any examples of how living with type 1 diabetes has impacted on your friendships, or any examples of how maybe it's impacted your social life?
Yeah. So I would say how type 1 diabetes has impacted my friendship is particularly back in school. I didn't want to tell anyone back in secondary school that I was living with type 1 diabetes. So a few people knew in my form class, but I didn't want the wider year group or the school to know. So I hid it as much as I could. Um, and looking back, that wasn't the best thing to do, but I just wanted to survive and be a normal teenager. However, but to this day, I'm still friends with like one of my best friends. We've known each other since year 7, so 11. We're the same age, and obviously 20 plus years of friendship later. Now I'm doing all of this advocacy work. We had a conversation maybe last year, year before, and he said to me, back in school, you never used to speak about your diabetes. And it's not weird, but it's weird to see you now talking so openly about it. And the only thing you ever told me was you have to be careful with like your feet and what shoes you wear because it can have an impact. And it came from a really good place of what he was saying, but it just reminded me of how it did impact my friendships because I just didn't want people to know. And I would only tell people who, if we were on a night out or something, I would make sure at least 1 or 2 people knew, or it was the same people and they knew. So if I was ever having a hypo and I don't know, couldn't get to the bar or I didn't have stuff, somebody could get something for me. If I couldn't do it myself. So yeah, so that's probably, it's definitely had an impact. Much so when I was younger, whereas now I talk about it with everyone. I wear my technology on my arm, so and if you see my technology, you will know I have or I have something, and then people will ask conversations. And like I said, if people want to follow me on social media, I will always give. That's the only profile that I have, so I will give them that profile. I think there was somebody that he used to work with, and their son had type 1 diabetes, and so he was just having a conversation saying, "Oh, my friend has type 1 diabetes," and so it now enables him to have a conversation with somebody when he hears type 1 diabetes. So yeah, there's a lot of good that has come out of the openness from my side to talk about my type 1 diabetes as well.
Yeah. And do you mind me asking you, do you drink alcohol?
Yeah. So I drink out, but not as much as when I was in my early teenage years and going out every every weekend. But I drink alcohol very occasionally now. But yeah, I do drink alcohol.
And does that have an impact on your type 1 diabetes?
Yes, yeah. So different types of alcohol can have a different impact on me. So if I were to have a spirit with um, a mixer, depending on the mixer, I don't always have diet mixers. I might have full sugar coke, or might have a fruit juice with a spirit. So I will manage the fruit juice or I'll manage that with insulin. So that would normally send my levels higher, but I can manage that with the insulin. If I were to have, say, white wine, for example, that sends my levels lower, but not straight away. Usually 5, 6 hours later, I've noticed. But red wine doesn't have that impact. So it's just really understanding um, what different types of alcohol, the impact that it has. Yeah, and also even just the weighing up of whether you want to do something or not is a lot of kind of the undercurrent of living with type 1 diabetes as well. So sometimes it can be not just but related to food. I don't know if everyone wants to have something to eat at 9 o'clock in the evening or 10 o'clock. Do I really want to eat at 10 o'clock, then to have insulin on board at midnight, or and then I want to sleep, or and so there's all of that that's going on, and depending on the meal that I'm having. So yeah, so there's a lot of weighing up that's involved in living with type 1 diabetes. But when it comes to food, I think that there's a lot of conversation in the community about obviously bulimia and type 1 diabetes and eating disordered, but also I think type 1 diabetes also creates for disordered eating, because you don't look at food the same way as somebody else looks at food. Even the example I gave of questioning if I want to eat at 9 or 10 o'clock because of having to take insulin and then having to manage it, rather than thinking, oh, if I'm hungry at 10 o'clock, I'll just have something to eat and I'll be okay. And that's kind of the thought process of somebody living with type 1 diabetes that has become quote unquote normal, but it's not normal, but it's just something that we have to adjust to and adapt to. Where you talk about family events, so I'm from the Caribbean, family events can start quite late. Food can be available throughout the evening into the early hours. But also, if you say to an auntie or a family, oh, I don't want any food, it can be taken as, so what, you don't like my food? And it's like, no, I love your food, I want your food, but maybe I can't just have it now. So there's also that you're having to manage.
How has living with type 1 diabetes impacted on your career?
Yeah. So type 1 diabetes has impacted on in my career. It's had a substantial negative, but also a positive impact as well. And with the negative, I lost a job relating to my type 1 diabetes. But also the positive is that when I was working at the diabetes charity, it came at the right time for me, because it was I was in a safe space. I I really understood how to manage the condition, and not just because I didn't read. This was when I was coming out of a period of diabetes distress and diabetes burnout. And it wasn't just the physical management, but it was the mental and the emotional management. But also kind of key was how to navigate the NHS and how to self-advocate for yourself, for the technology and for the things that you are entitled to, which I had no idea. And again, that links back to what I mentioned about the health inequalities and health inequities. When you come from an environment, you just listen to what the doctor says. You don't question the doctor. You don't sometimes you do, but typically you don't research what you're entitled to or how to access it or know what NICE guidelines are. And so that information that was given to me whilst working at the charity. So that's where it's had a positive impact on me, because I was able to get sensor or to understand about the sensors whilst I was working there. But most important, I was able to get my insulin pump and how to navigate the system whilst I was working there. And a colleague was speaking to me about getting an insulin pump. Had I not been there, I wouldn't have had that, and it wouldn't have had such a profound impact on my diabetes management. And so that's why I say it's had both a significant negative impact, but for me, most importantly, a positive impact. And when I've been in jobs that I've had since leaving the charity, I quite openly talk about my type 1 diabetes. So everyone knows I have type 1 diabetes. I say that very early on, whereas before I would just hide it as much as I could.
And all that learning that you've gained, you've turned it into another lane of your career in the advocacy work that you're doing, and other people will be benefiting from that as well, won't they?
Yeah, it's yeah, I have, and I haven't really thought about it much until maybe a few months ago, that I was having a conversation with somebody, and I'd given a talk, and they gave feedback and said, wow, you really turned the your negative into a positive. And I didn't realize it at the time. I knew, but I didn't subconsciously acknowledge it. And so yeah, it has been that. And I think a lot of people, and I'm like me, feel that when you share your journey, you just don't want people to go through what you've been through, or if they find themselves in your situation, just know that they're not the only one, because at times I felt like I was the only one. So yeah, it is just taking that bad period and using it to help others.
Well, thank you so much for everything that you shared, but we're at the end of our time now. It's been absolutely wonderful hearing your story. I'm really delighted to have had this opportunity to speak to you, and I'm really sure that everything that you've shared today will really help anybody that's listening to understand just a little bit more what it's like to live with type 1 diabetes. Thank you to everyone who has listened, and if you're interested in finding out more about the work that we do, please follow A Life in a Day on LinkedIn, Instagram and Facebook. Thank you.
Thank you, Bev. Thanks for having me.